The first snow had fallen heavy that week, thick and unbroken, blanketing the Wyoming wilderness in a silence that felt unnatural. I had been planning this solo hunt for months, mapping out secluded ridges where the elk moved at night, and now, under a gray, cloud-choked sky, I found myself parked at the edge of a narrow trail that led deep into the Bighorn Mountains. The cold was immediate, cutting through layers of wool and down, and my breath formed clouds in the air as I slung my rifle over my shoulder and stepped onto the snow-packed path. I moved slowly, boots crunching, ears straining for any sound that wasn't the wind. The forest had a stillness I had never encountered in daylight hunts. The usual chatter of birds and rustle of small animals was gone. Only the heavy hush of snow-laden branches and the occasional creak of pines bending under frost. I told myself it was normal that animals hunker down in winter, but a gnawing unease settled in my chest that I couldn't shake. 2 miles in, the trail opened into a small clearing that looked like the perfect ambush spot. I had scouted it earlier in the season. There was a rise on the far edge where elk tracks converged. I crouched low in the snow, scanning for movement. My rifle rested on my knee, safety off, finger poised near the trigger. The tracks were fresh, and my pulse quickened. I whispered into the empty clearing, reminding myself to stay calm, and then I heard it. A crack of a branch, sudden, to my right. I froze. Deer, I told myself. Probably a deer, but instinct screamed otherwise. I slowly swept my light across the tree line. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Not a deer, too tall, too thin, and it moved with a fluidity that didn't belong to any creature I had ever seen. I rose slowly to retreat, keeping my eyes on the shadows. That's when I noticed the footprints in the snow. Not tracks of boots, not animal prints, but bare, enormous feet. At least 14 inches long, and they didn't sink much into the snow, as if whatever made them was light despite its size. I followed them with my gaze, and they disappeared into the denser trees, ending abruptly as though the snow itself had swallowed the creature. I exhaled sharply, trying to calm my nerves. A rational part of me insisted it was a trick of light and shadow, that I was imagining things. But then came the sound, a low, deliberate rustle through the branches behind me. Not fast like a deer or a wolf, but slow and measured, as if it were stalking me. I held my breath, rifle raised, scanning. The air seemed to thicken, colder, heavier. I started to backtrack slowly, keeping my eyes on the area where I had first seen movement. My heart thudded so loud I feared it would give me away. Then I saw it, just a shape at first, silhouetted against the snow. Then details became visible. Unnaturally long limbs, pale skin reflecting faint light, a head that tilted at an angle no human head should. Its eyes, deep, dark hollows, seemed to pierce through me. I should have stayed still, I knew that, but panic overrode caution. I fired a shot, the rifle cracking in the still night. Snow and bark flew where the bullet struck a tree near it. The thing recoiled briefly, then vanished into the trees as if it had never been there. My fingers shook so badly I had to take a moment to steady the rifle. I decided then to retreat, retracing my steps back toward the truck. My feet slipped on ice, snow stinging my face as I ran blindly through the trees. Branches whipped across my arms, tearing at my clothing. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, not chased. Whatever it was, it didn't need to catch me. It wanted to guide me somewhere. By the time I reached a small rise overlooking the trail, the truck was visible through the darkening storm, headlights and tail reflectors catching bits of snow. Relief washed over me, but I didn't slow down. Not until I was inside, doors locked, engine roaring. My hands trembled as I tried to start the truck. After several tries, it caught, and I floored it, tires slipping on ice but propelling me forward. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing. No sign of the shape, no tracks, nothing. Just the snow-covered ridge, silent and still. But I could feel it, the awareness of being watched, even from that distance. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station on the highway, lights glowing warm against the endless cold. I sat in the cab, shivering, listening to the wind howl around the building, and tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. But the fear didn't fade. The kind that burrows into your chest, making every quiet sound feel like a threat. The next day, with 2 friends who refused to leave me alone, I returned to the ridge in daylight. Snow had fallen again overnight, fresh and soft, almost erasing the events of the previous night. We searched methodically, following the path I had taken, but there were no prints, no disturbance, nothing to suggest anything had been there at all, just the trees leaning under the weight of snow and a silence deeper than any I had ever known. We found one thing, though, a single footprint, enormous, bare, and perfectly preserved in a small patch of older snow near the edge of the clearing. Long, almost human, but not human, like someone or something had stepped there and vanished. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. My friend Paul said it must be a prank or a trick of nature, but I could feel it in my gut. It was real, and it was watching. I've been back to that area since, but never alone. I hunt with friends now, always in groups, and we stick to daylight hours. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind shifts just right, I hear the sound in my mind, the low, rasping mimic of breathing, deliberate and almost conversational. I know it's out there. I know it remembers, and I know if I ever return alone, it will find me again, leading me into the cold, empty darkness where the snow swallows everything and nothing is quite what it seems. I've hunted every corner of this state, faced wolves, bears, cougars, storms, and avalanches. I felt fear, but nothing like that night. It wasn't the wind or the cold or being alone. It was the knowledge that something intelligent, something patient, was moving in the same woods I had always called home. And it was waiting for me to make a mistake. Every winter since, when the first snow falls and the nights grow long, I sit by the fire and double-check my doors, listen to the wind, and remember the shape in the shadows, the hollow eyes, the tilt of a head that no human should ever have. And I remember the way the snow swallowed its tracks, leaving only the faint impression of something that shouldn't exist, because once you've seen it, you never forget. The snow was falling harder than I expected that night. It had started as a light dusting when I left my truck, but by the time I trudged a mile into the woods, it was thick, muffling everything around me. My boots sank into the crusted snow with every step, the soft crunch beneath them oddly comforting at first. I had been hunting alone for years, mostly in northern Wisconsin, but the forest always had a way of reminding you who really ruled it. Winter nights were the worst, silent, cold, and alive, in ways your eyes couldn't always see. I had left my cabin late, hoping to catch a few deer before the snowfall made tracking impossible. The sun had set over the ridge hours ago, leaving the world in that pale twilight that comes just before full darkness. I carried my rifle over my shoulder, a thermos of coffee in my pack, and a small flashlight tucked into my jacket pocket. The air smelled like snow and pine, crisp enough to make your lungs ache, and I thought about the warmth of the cabin behind me. Just a few more hours and I could be back inside with a fire roaring. I followed a familiar trail along a ridge that sloped into a narrow valley. The snow had already hidden most of the tracks, but I could tell by the way the branches hung heavy with snow where animals had passed. The first hour went as expected. I saw the fleeting flash of a doe, heard the distant howl of a coyote, and felt that rare, quiet peace that comes from being completely alone in the woods. But as the sky darkened completely, I started to feel uneasy. The wind had picked up, moving in strange gusts that seemed to come from different directions, and the forest sounds fell strangely quiet. That's when I heard it, the first snap of a branch that wasn't mine. I froze, listening. The snow muffled it, but I could tell it had been close, maybe 50 feet off the trail, just past a stand of spruce. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal, and I moved cautiously, stepping over fallen branches and pushing past the thick brush. My rifle was ready in my hands now, the weight comforting, a solid barrier between me and whatever was out there. The second sound came moments later, this one louder, deliberate. A heavy footfall, then another, uneven, slow. My heart jumped into my throat. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight into the trees, but all I saw were dark shapes and shadows dancing in the falling snow. The woods seemed to press in around me, every tree a potential hiding place. I started walking faster, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Hunters spend a lot of time alone. Your mind plays tricks on you. But then the footsteps followed me. Slow at first, then picking up pace whenever I did. I stopped and waited. They stopped. I moved again. They moved again. My stomach clenched. This wasn't an animal. Nothing I knew moved like this. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the path back to the cabin. It wasn't far, maybe a mile, but every step felt like it took forever. I glanced over my shoulder, just once, and froze. Something was there. I don't know how else to describe it. Tall, hunched, moving wrong. Its limbs seemed too long, dragging slightly through the snow. It wore layers of dark, tattered coats, stitched together in a grotesque patchwork. A hood covered its face, but underneath it was just blackness, like a hole in the world. I ran. The cold hit my lungs like knives, snow spraying from my boots, my rifle swinging awkwardly in my hands. The thing followed, its steps crunching through the snow in a rhythm that mimicked mine. Occasionally, I'd hear the rasping of breath, harsh and wet, like it hadn't inhaled in years. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I did, I'd be dead before I hit the ground. The clearing came into view, a faint moonlight reflecting off the snow, and beyond it, the cabin. I lunged across the last few yards, slamming the door behind me and locking it. The sudden quiet inside the cabin made me think I'd imagined it, but the doorknob rattled violently within seconds, shaking the frame. My rifle was ready, my back against the wall, eyes on the door. The silence lasted for what felt like hours. I could hear the snow falling outside, the occasional groan of a tree bending under the weight. And then the tap came, soft, deliberate, at the window. I didn't breathe. The tap came again, and then something dragged across the glass slowly like nails scraping frost. I raised the rifle, aimed at the shadow beyond the pane. It was there, moving just out of clear view. The black hooded face, the long arms wrapped in coats, the hunched posture. It didn't speak. It didn't run. It just watched, testing, patient, as if waiting for something. I fired once into the snow beside it. The sound cracked through the cabin, startling me more than anything else. The figure didn't react. The snow outside remained still, untouched. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the rifle across my lap, the small lamp casting flickering shadows, listening to the wind and the occasional creak outside. Every time a branch snapped or snow shifted, I thought it had returned. I didn't leave until sunrise, when the forest seemed to reclaim its ordinary silence. The snow was fresh, pristine, no tracks, no signs that anything had been there. Nothing. I stepped carefully, scanning the area, half expecting the thing to appear in the trees. But it didn't. I didn't see it again that day. Weeks later, I went back with another hunter, a friend who knew the area well. We found nothing unusual. No signs, no footprints, nothing that made sense. I tried to tell him what I had seen, the shapes, the coats, the way it moved. He laughed it off, called it winter nerves, stress, isolation. But I know what I saw. I know how it followed. I know how it waited, patient, just beyond the edge of visibility. I stopped hunting alone after that night. I can't explain what it was or why it followed me, but I know it was real. Some part of me wonders if it watches still, out there in the forests, hidden beneath the trees and snow, waiting for someone foolish enough to wander alone at night. Every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the woods go silent, I remember that night. I remember the way it moved, the emptiness under that hood, the slow, deliberate footsteps following me through the snow. I hear the rasping breaths in my dreams, the tap at the windows, the faint scratching on the walls. I've been hunting for decades, but nothing has ever felt more alive or more hungry than that winter night. I don't go alone anymore. I don't walk trails after dark. I don't listen for the rustle of branches without expecting something to answer, because I know it's out there, watching, patient, and it remembers me. Story, the end. The wind was already slicing through the trees when I pulled my coat tighter and stepped out of the truck. It was late December, and the sky had long since surrendered to night. The snow was falling thick, muffling everything, covering my tracks almost as soon as I made them. I had planned this solo hunting trip weeks ago, a chance to finally get away from work, from people, from the constant noise. I told myself that being alone in the Montana wilderness in the dead of winter would be liberating. I was wrong. The trail I followed led me down a narrow valley lined with spruce and pine. The snow crunched under my boots, the only sound in the otherwise deafening silence. My flashlight cast long, eerie shadows across the trees, and my breath fogged in front of me in short bursts. I was tracking a deer, fresh tracks that disappeared just a few miles back, but the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in on me. It was almost like the trees were leaning closer, curious. After about an hour, I stopped on a ridge overlooking a frozen creek. I knelt, studying the tracks. The deer's path had gone off to the left, heading toward a dense stand of trees. The snow was deeper here, and the prints had become muddled like the animal had been struggling. Then I realized they stopped. Not gradually, not buried by snow. They simply ended. My stomach knotted. I swept the flashlight slowly over the forest floor, looking for broken branches, drag marks, anything to suggest what had happened. Nothing. My skin crawled. I shook my head and tried to remind myself it was just a deer. Animals get scared. They turn around. They hide. I took a step forward. Snow shifted behind me. I froze. My ears strained. The sound was faint but deliberate. A crunch, then another. Not like footsteps, not soft, but heavy and careful. I spun around, rifle up, scanning the trees. Nothing. I took another step and the noise came again, this time from the other side. Panic prickled my spine. I wasn't alone. My flashlight caught a movement, a shadow, thin, towering, ducking behind the trunk of it. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew I hadn't imagined it. My breathing hitched. I raised the rifle, trying to focus, but my hands were shaking violently from both the cold and the fear. Then it stepped out. It was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs bending at angles that should have been impossible. Its skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tightly over its bones. It had no clothing, no fur, nothing to protect it from the freezing cold. Its head was elongated, the jaw slack, eyes dark, reflective in the flashlight. It didn't move like a person, didn't move like an animal. It just glided, almost floating above the snow. I fired. The report echoed through the valley. The creature jerked as the bullet struck it, but it didn't fall. Its body recoiled unnaturally, then it straightened, tilting its head as if curious. Then it smiled, or at least its face contorted in a way that resembled a grin, stretching impossibly wide. I fired again, this time more out of instinct than aim. The creature vanished behind the trees in a blur, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. My breath came in harsh gasps. I knew I had to get out of there. My truck, only a mile away, was my only chance. I turned and ran, stumbling over hidden roots and rocks, my boots slipping in the snow. Every instinct screamed at me not to look back. Branches snapped behind me, twigs cracked under weight. The sound was close, too close. Then I heard it, a low guttural groan, something between a growl and a human voice. My name. Whispered, drawn out, wrong. Aaron! My blood ran cold. Nobody knew I was out here. Nobody should have known my name. I scrambled down the slope toward the creek, ice cutting into my hands when I braced myself. Behind me, the groaning grew louder, closer. Something heavy moved through the snow, following me. I slipped and fell, rifle sliding out of reach. Snow exploded around me. For a moment, I thought it had caught me. Then it was gone. Silence. I scrambled to my feet and limped toward my truck, ankle twisting painfully on hidden ice. I fumbled with the keys, my hands numb, my teeth chattering. My headlights pierced the dark just as I heard it again, this time from the trees to my left. I froze. My headlights caught a glimpse. Tall, skeletal figure, unnaturally long limbs, moving with impossible speed. It stopped, as if calculating, then stepped into the road. I slammed the truck into gear, flooring the accelerator. The tires spun on the icy road, then caught. The creature stumbled slightly, but it didn't chase. It didn't need to. It simply watched, pale and tall, standing in the snow like it had been waiting for me to leave. I drove for what felt like hours, the forest receding into black nothingness behind me. My hands still shook on the wheel. The truck radio crackled with static, nothing else. Eventually, the highway lights appeared, and I thought I was safe. But the image of that thing stayed with me. I couldn't shake it. The way it moved, the way it watched, the way it knew my name. Back at home, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a hallucination from exhaustion and cold, maybe some kind of animal I'd never seen. But every night since, I hear the wind differently. Every shadow in the corner of my eyes seems too deliberate. And last winter, after a heavy snowfall, I saw tracks in the snow behind my house. Deep, wide, human-like, but wrong. They ended abruptly at the tree line, just like that deer's tracks had ended that night. I haven't hunted alone since. I haven't gone near that forest again, but sometimes when the wind dies completely and the snow falls silently, I swear I hear it outside, calling my name. Story the end. The wind had been picking up all afternoon, slicing across the frozen landscape like knives. I had parked my truck on the side of a snow-packed forest road somewhere in northern Minnesota, the tires half buried in drifts that had grown overnight. It was late December, and I had been planning this hunt for months. A lone trek into the backcountry to track a trophy buck that had been spotted by locals for the past week. I knew the terrain well, or at least I thought I did, but something about the forest that day made my stomach knot. The pines, heavy with ice and snow, groaned and creaked, and even from inside the truck, it felt like the trees were closing in. I left the truck just as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges. My boots crunched across the hard snow as I carried my rifle over my shoulder, a backpack filled with essentials bouncing against my spine. The first hour was straightforward. I followed a narrow game trail I had scouted earlier that week, the tracks of deer and the occasional coyote still visible. The cold was biting, but not unbearable yet. My breath hung in the air in thick clouds, and the smell of pine mixed with the sharp tang of frost in the air. After a while, though, the forest began to change. The trees grew denser, the snow deeper, and the wind louder. I spotted the tracks I had been hoping for, fresh hoofprints leading off the trail into a small clearing surrounded by birch. My pulse quickened. I crouched, trying to make myself as small as possible in the dim light, scanning for movement. The tracks were fresh, maybe only an hour old. I took a few cautious steps into the clearing, my rifle ready, and that's when I heard it. The first of many sounds that would make the night unforgettable. Not a crackling branch or distant howl, but something subtle, something deliberate, a soft thud behind me. I froze, straining to hear over the rush of wind through the trees. Thud. Thud. Closer now. I swung my rifle toward the sound, but the forest was empty. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a deer, maybe a falling branch, but the way it moved, deliberate and uneven, made my stomach twist. I backed out of the clearing slowly, keeping my eyes on every shadow, every flicker of movement. That's when I noticed the other tracks, not the deer's. Something else had been here, following the same path, overlaying my own footprints in the snow. I knelt to examine them. The prints were large, taller than a man, elongated, with a shape that was almost human but wrong, like a distorted shadow of a person. My pulse spiked, and I swallowed hard. I decided it was time to move. I had a mile or so to cover to reach the old logging road that would take me back to the truck. I had planned to stay until dark, but something in the forest told me to leave immediately. As I moved, the crunch of snow underfoot seemed to echo unnaturally loud. I kept my rifle at the ready, scanning in a slow circle as the wind picked up, carrying with it a low, moaning sound I couldn't place. It didn't match any animal I knew. I had just rounded a stand of pines when I saw it, a figure at the edge of my vision, tall, thin, and impossibly still. I froze. My first thought was a hunter like me, but the proportions were all wrong. It seemed too tall, its limbs too long, and there was a way it moved just out of step with the wind, as if gliding over the snow. I raised my rifle and called out, voice shaking, "Hey, who's there?" No answer, just the sound of wind in the trees. When I looked back, the figure was gone. Panic set in. I jogged, then ran, boots slipping on ice and snow as I tried to keep my bearings. The darkness was thick now, and the storm blowing in was reducing visibility to almost nothing. Every time I thought I had lost sight of the figure, I caught glimpses of it, always behind me, always moving in a way that didn't seem natural. I could hear heavy footsteps echoing mine, though when I turned sharply to confront it, nothing was there. I finally reached the logging road, and the faint glint of headlights in the distance gave me hope. I ran toward them, breaking through small drifts and flailing branches, but then I saw something that made me stumble and nearly fall. The snow around me was disturbed in patterns I couldn't explain. It wasn't animal tracks, not human either, not fully. The prints were enormous, deep, and irregular, almost as if whatever had made them was crouching and standing repeatedly, moving with deliberate, slow steps. My mind raced. There was no way a person that tall could exist, not without some monstrous exaggeration. By the time I saw the truck, I was shaking from cold and fear. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before getting the door open. I slammed it shut, locked it, and started the engine. My hands trembled so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. As I drove off, headlights cutting through the snowstorm, I thought I was safe. But then, at the edge of the clearing where I had seen it, I caught a glimpse of the figure again. It was standing perfectly still, watching me go, taller than any man, its head tilted slightly as though studying the truck. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning over ice and snow as I barreled down the road. Every curve of the forest seemed to shift in the headlights. Every shadow made me jerk the wheel instinctively. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, the warmth of streetlights and the smell of gas from the station nearly bringing me to tears. I parked, locked the truck, and sat inside for a long while, listening for any sound outside. There was nothing. I never went back to that part of Minnesota in winter. I told myself it was a hallucination, the stress of hunting alone, the exhaustion, the cold. But I know what I saw. I felt it, the way it moved in the snow behind me, the way it watched. Months later, I spoke to a local hunter at a diner in town. He listened to my story, nodded slowly, and said, "You weren't the first to see it. Hell, you won't be the last. Folks call it the winter walker. Comes out when the snow's deep and the woods are quiet. Doesn't attack, not like a bear or wolf, but it follows, watches, makes you know you're being hunted without ever touching you." I laughed it off at the time, but deep down I knew better. I knew that something was out there, waiting for nights like that, in forests like the one I had almost died in. Hunting alone in winter was no longer something I did for sport. Now it was a gamble with the unknown, a test of whether I could survive long enough to see the sun rise. I keep my rifle close, even now. When the nights are long and the snow falls hard, I remember the sound of the footsteps behind me, the way they matched mine but never caught up, the way the forest itself seemed to pause, just enough to let me know I wasn't alone. I learned that the hard way. Even now, I can't shake the memory of those elongated tracks in the snow leading through the forest as if someone or something had walked right over my own prints, following, always following. The winter walker, or whatever it was, doesn't rush. It waits. And if you're foolish enough to be alone in the forest, it will find you. I never go out after dark in winter anymore. I've stopped hunting alone. Every time I hear the wind whistle through the trees, I swear I hear it. Soft, deliberate steps following me, even when I'm miles from the forest. And that's why I warn anyone who will listen. Winter nights in the backcountry aren't empty. The snow isn't just snow. And if you're hunting alone, you're never really alone. Story the end. The cold hit my face like a knife the moment I stepped out of the truck. Northern Minnesota winters were brutal, but I'd hunted these woods long enough to think I could handle anything. I carried my rifle over my shoulder, a small pack with some trail mix and water, and my headlamp strapped tight. The snow had already started falling steadily, dusting the pine needles and covering the old tracks that might have led me to a deer. I was alone, as I preferred. Hunting with others was slower, and the thrill of tracking quietly through untouched snow had always been my favorite part. The first hour went smoothly. I followed a familiar game trail, watching for prints in the snow and listening for movement. The forest was quiet, only the occasional snap of a branch or the call of a distant owl breaking the stillness. I paused occasionally, crouching behind a spruce to scan open spaces with my binoculars. A lone deer grazed 100 yards away, unaware of my presence, and I smiled, knowing I had a good shot if it came closer. The sun had already set when I reached a small clearing. Moonlight reflected off the snow, making the world seem almost surreal. That's when I heard it, the first crack of a branch. I froze immediately, scanning the trees around me. Nothing moved, but I knew it wasn't the wind. The sound had come from somewhere to my right, deeper into the forest. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer, maybe a coyote, but my gut tightened anyway. I continued, slowly, keeping my rifle at the ready. Then came another sound, unmistakably a footstep. Not a deer's, not a coyote's. Something heavier, deliberate, and unnervingly quiet for its size. My chest tightened. I tried to calm myself, telling myself my mind was playing tricks, that the isolation was getting to me. But the instinct in every hunter I'd ever known screamed, this was wrong. I broke into a slow jog, keeping my eyes on the trail back to my truck. I could hear the footsteps behind me now, matching my pace, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, as if whatever it was testing me. My breath came in ragged clouds, freezing as it left my lungs. Every snap of a branch made me flinch. I didn't look back, but I could feel it watching. The clearing ended, and I hit the trees again, moving through deeper snow. My boots sank with every step, and I struggled to maintain balance. That's when I smelled it. Something pungent, metallic, like blood mixed with decay. My stomach clenched. I'd smelled deer kills before, fresh and clean, but this was different. I had smelled death out here before, but never like this. This was unnatural, like the forest itself was warning me. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was another hunter, someone foolish to be out here alone at night, but the way it moved made my blood run cold. Tall, hunched, its limbs too long, dragging slightly in the snow. It wore what looked like layers of tattered coats stitched together, hanging from its frame in patches. Its head was covered with a hood, and underneath there was only darkness. No face, no eyes, nothing human. I ran. The snow sprayed under my boots, my rifle swinging awkwardly in my hands. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. The thing behind me moved faster too, crunching through the snow in uneven, deliberate steps. Every now and then I heard the rasp of its breath, wet and harsh. I didn't dare look back. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to survive, to reach the truck or the cabin I had parked near the edge of the woods. The trail curved, leading me to a small frozen creek. I stumbled over a hidden log, nearly breaking my ankle, but I got up and ran, ignoring the pain. The thing behind me let out a noise then, a low, guttural rasp like a human trying to scream after decades of silence. I pushed harder, feeling the snow give way under my feet, lungs on fire, heart pounding like a drum. Finally, I saw the truck's headlights faintly in the distance. I sprinted, praying the snow didn't hide another obstacle. The creature followed, slower now, but the sound of its movement didn't fade. It was patient, calculating, and I knew it would continue until I was dead, or it was satisfied. I reached the truck, fumbling with the keys. My hands were numb, shaking uncontrollably. The creature's presence seemed to stretch the air around me, a pressure that made my chest tight. I managed to unlock the door and shoved myself inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My heart thundered in my ears as I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror. The trees were empty, no sign of it, but I could feel its eyes on me. I drove slowly back to my cabin, the headlights cutting through the thick snowfall. The roads were empty, the forest silent but alive with an invisible presence. I didn't stop until I reached my cabin, running inside and locking the door behind me. The warmth hit my frozen body, but it didn't calm the terror in my chest. I stayed up all night, rifle in hand, listening. Every gust of wind, every creak of the cabin, every branch brushing against the window made me jump. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. Morning came with no sign of the creature. The snow outside was pristine, no footprints, no indication it had ever been there. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the trees, but the forest looked ordinary, peaceful. Too peaceful. I don't hunt alone anymore. Not at night, not in winter, not in those woods. The memory of its silhouette, the hollow darkness under that hood, the slow, deliberate pursuit, it haunts me. Some nights, when the wind blows just right and the snow falls in silence, I swear I can hear the rasping breath in the distance following me, waiting. Every winter, I remember that night. Every winter, I remember how close I came to never seeing the sun again. And I know, deep down, that whatever it is, it's still out there, patient, watching, waiting for the next fool to wander into the forest alone. Story the end. The sky was a bruised purple when I parked my truck at the edge of the forest, the snow already deep enough to make the tires groan. I had come up from northern Wisconsin for a late-season deer hunt, hoping to catch the last few days before the rut ended. The air was bitter, a raw, biting cold that turned my breath into clouds that hung in front of my face and disappeared into the darkening sky. I should have stayed home. I should have listened when my buddy Dan told me it was too risky to go out alone this late in the season in weather like this. But I ignored him, thinking I knew the woods, thinking I could handle it. I strapped on my pack and double-checked my rifle, the cold metal biting at my gloved hands. The forest was silent, almost unnaturally so, except for the occasional whisper of wind through the pines. Snow crunched under my boots as I followed a trail I had scouted on a previous trip, heading toward a ridge that offered a clear view of a valley where deer often grazed. I had planned to set up there, wait, and take the first decent buck I saw. The sun was gone by the time I reached the ridge, leaving the world in a dim, gray twilight. The snowstorm had picked up, turning the air into a thick white haze that made it difficult to see more than 20 feet ahead. I crouched behind a fallen log and scanned the clearing below. Nothing moved. Not a deer, not a bird, not even a squirrel. Just the wind and the snow and the oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my chest. Then I heard it, a faint snap from the trees behind me. I froze, straining to listen. My heart started to beat faster, a low, insistent thrum in my chest. Another snap, closer this time, followed by the soft crunch of snow under heavy boots. Not deer, not a bear. Something human, or at least humanoid. My hands tightened on my rifle. I whispered into the wind, "Hello?" But the forest swallowed my voice. No answer. Just the sound of something or someone moving closer. I debated leaving, going back to the truck, but instinct told me to stay. Whatever it was, it hadn't seen me yet. I crouched lower, trying to make myself invisible in the snow-covered forest. The sound came again, a soft, deliberate step just behind the ridge. My stomach turned cold. Whoever or whatever it was, it knew I was there, and it was coming for me. I swung my head slowly, trying to catch a glimpse through the swirling snow. At first, I thought I saw a shadow, dark and thin, weaving between the trees. My rational brain told me it was a trick of the light, but the fear in my gut said otherwise. The shadow moved with an unnatural stillness, stopping whenever I tried to track it with my eyes. My pulse raced, my fingers numb from the cold and tension. I whispered my own name under my breath, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining it. But then I heard it, soft, deliberate, almost like a hiss. My name, carried on the wind. Ryan. I froze, my body locked in place. Nobody knew I was out here. Nobody should have known my name. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. I loaded a round into my rifle and aimed toward the trees, but the snow made visibility nearly impossible. I told myself it was a prank, some lost hunter trying to scare me, but the way the air seemed to vibrate with intent made my skin crawl. The sound shifted, moving around me, circling in the trees. My eyes darted to every shadow, every branch that bent under the weight of snow. I saw something move, just a blur between two pines, and I fired. The rifle cracked, echoing across the valley. The shot hit nothing, but it didn't run. If anything, I could feel it now. Something in the forest. Something waiting, watching me like prey. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Panic began to set in. I knew I had to get out of the ridge before whatever it was closed in on me. I moved slowly, deliberately, trying not to make a sound. Every step was a struggle in the deep snow, every branch I brushed against threatening to give away my position. The wind howled, carrying a whisper of movement that seemed to follow me. Then I heard a soft cracking behind me, like ice breaking under a heavy weight. I turned just in time to see a dark figure vanish behind a tree. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. I stumbled down the slope toward my truck, slipping over hidden roots and rocks under the snow. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the snowstorm disorienting me, erasing every landmark I had memorized. My lungs burned from the cold and the effort, my boots soaked and heavy. I could hear the sound of something moving behind me, faster now, breaking through the snow and branches in a way no human could. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I reached the edge of the clearing where I had parked my truck and saw the faint glow of the dashboard lights through the snow. Relief washed over me, and I sprinted the last few yards, fumbling for my keys. I threw the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut, locking it. My hands shook as I started the engine. The heater kicked in, blasting warmth into my freezing body, but it couldn't reach the icy fear gripping my mind. I thought I was safe. I thought it had stayed in the woods. Then I saw it. A dark imprint, a handprint smeared across the frost on my windshield, long and thin, stretching from the top to the bottom. I screamed and slammed the wipers, but the mark didn't go away. The snow outside was pristine and untouched, except for that handprint. My stomach turned over. I hadn't seen anyone get near the truck. Nobody else knew I was out here. I drove without stopping, barely able to see through the storm, until I reached the main road where snowplows had cleared a path. My phone had no signal, but I called Dan as soon as I could. He laughed, said I must have imagined it, that the cold and stress had gotten to me. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew. Whatever had been in the forest with me wasn't human. It had known me. It had hunted me. And it was still out there. That winter, I never went hunting alone again. I stick to daytime hunts with friends where the wind doesn't carry whispers and shadows don't move against the snow. But sometimes late at night, I can still hear it in my dreams. My name, carried on the wind through the trees, and the sound of snow crunching behind me as something moves closer, patient, waiting. And I know, without a doubt, that if I ever go alone again, it will be there, watching, hunting, and it won't forget my name. Story the end. The snow crunched under my boots as I pushed through the last stand of pines before the clearing. My breath came out in white clouds, and the cold nipped at the exposed skin of my face. Winter in northern Minnesota could get unforgiving, but I liked it that way. Hunting alone always gave me a sense of control, a chance to be fully responsible for myself. Or at least I told myself that. I had been tracking a buck since mid-morning, following its prints from the creek up along the ridge. The snow was deep, but it made the tracks clear and easy to follow. The sun had dipped behind the horizon an hour ago, and now twilight settled over the forest like a gray veil. I adjusted my flashlight and rifle, crouched low, and moved cautiously through the thinning trees. The first odd thing I noticed was the silence. The forest at night had its own music. The snap of branches under deer hooves, the faint rustle of wind in the treetops, the distant howl of a coyote. But tonight it was muffled, unnaturally so. Even the wind seemed to have given up. I stopped and scanned the area. My flashlight caught the tracks again, leading into a thicket. I approached slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched low, almost blending into the darkness and snow. My heart skipped. I froze, trying to convince myself it was a deer or some other animal. But it was wrong. Too big, too upright. I raised my rifle, finger resting on the trigger, and called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small and weak in the vast silence. The figure didn't move, just stared, or at least I felt like it did. Then, without warning, it vanished into the shadows. My pulse raced. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the way the snow shifted and reflected my flashlight. I forced myself to move on. The tracks led me to a small clearing where the buck had been grazing earlier. The snow here was undisturbed, except for my own footprints and the faint impression of the deer's. I crouched behind a fallen log, waiting, ears straining for any sound. That's when I heard it, a low, wet scrape like claws across frozen wood. I swung my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing. My stomach sank. I'd been alone in the woods countless times, but something about the way that sound lingered in the night made my skin crawl. I told myself to keep calm. It's just an animal. A coyote or a fox, nothing else. I spent the next hour carefully tracking the buck, moving slowly, checking every shadow, every tree. The moon broke through the clouds for a moment, casting a pale light over the snow. That's when I noticed the prints weren't just deer tracks anymore. Mixed in with the hooves were long, human-like footprints, but they were too big, too wide, as if someone or something had massive feet. I froze again. My mind raced. Who could be out here at this hour? And why would they be following a deer in such deep snow? I decided to head back to my truck. The night had turned colder, and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I retraced my steps, trying to move quietly, but the snow seemed to swallow my prints, erasing them as if the forest itself didn't want me there. That's when I heard it. Breath. Heavy, ragged, coming from behind me. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but the woods were empty. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I broke into a run, heading toward where I thought the main trail was. Branches whipped at my face, snow stung my skin, but I didn't stop. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. Behind me, the snapping of branches followed. Not just behind me, but all around me, circling, keeping pace. I tripped over a root and hit the snow hard, gasping for air. My flashlight went out when it struck the ground. Panic surged. I fumbled with the batteries, hands shaking, and managed to get it back on. The beam caught something moving between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin, leaning forward as it moved. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze. I scrambled to my feet and ran harder. The forest was a blur of black trunks and white snow. The snapping of branches was relentless, closing in, cutting off escape routes. Finally, I saw the faint glow of my truck. Relief surged. I didn't care about stealth anymore. I sprinted across the snow, threw open the door, and slammed inside. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, my breath fogging in the cold cabin air. The engine roared to life, and I hit the lights. The clearing was empty. No footprints. No sign of whatever had been following me. Just the snow, pristine and untouched, except for my own tracks leading to the truck. I didn't stop driving until I reached the highway, heart still racing, eyes scanning the dark tree line. I didn't even think about the deer. I went straight home, shut every door and window, and sat in the living room, staring at the floor. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had been there in those woods with me, watching, waiting. And it hadn't left footprints when I saw it. I didn't go hunting alone after that night. I stayed away from the woods, from the trails I knew so well, from the place I had thought of as safe. Friends and family asked why I stopped, why I didn't return to the cabin or the hunting grounds. I lied. I said I hurt my leg, said the weather was too harsh, but I knew the truth. The forest had changed that night, and whatever followed me that winter night was still out there. Months later, I got a text from a friend who hunts nearby. He said some hikers had reported footprints in the snow near the same clearing I'd been in, human-like, enormous, and no one could explain them. I never went back, and I never will. Story the end. The snow had started falling in thick, heavy flakes by the time Jake parked his truck at the edge of the forest. It was the kind of winter night that pressed cold air into your lungs the second you stepped outside, turning breath into clouds that dissipated into the darkness. He had planned this hunting trip for weeks, a solo expedition into the deep woods of northern Minnesota, hoping for a late-season deer. The isolation was part of the appeal. There was nothing like the silence of a winter forest, broken only by the snap of branches underfoot and the occasional cry of a distant owl. Jake hoisted his pack and shouldered his rifle, stepping into the snow, each footfall sinking a little deeper than the last. He moved with deliberate caution, aware that the snow made it difficult to mask his presence. The tracks of animals were everywhere, faint impressions in the otherwise unbroken white. He paused, scanning the surrounding trees, noting the tracks that were too large to be any deer or fox. He shrugged. Probably a moose. As he moved further into the forest, the sky darkened, clouds blocking out the waning light of late afternoon. His flashlight cut through the trees in a narrow cone of yellow light, illuminating falling snow and the occasional glint of ice on a branch. The woods were thick here, trunks huddled close together, snow-laden boughs forming a half cover. Jake stopped, crouching behind a fallen tree, scanning the slope ahead. A large buck had been spotted here a few days ago, and he hoped it was still around. Then he heard it, a soft, irregular crack like a branch breaking under weight, but heavier than any animal he'd seen in the area. He froze, eyes darting through the shadows. The snow muffled sound, but his heart pounded loudly enough he thought it must be audible. He whispered to himself, "Probably just a deer." He raised his rifle cautiously, scanning the darkness, but the woods remained still. Minutes passed, the snow falling heavier, covering the tracks beneath his boots. The sense of unease grew, subtle but insistent, like something pressing at the edges of his awareness. Then it came again, a dragging sound, faint, slow, deliberate, moving around him in a circle. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The sound didn't match any animal. It was too measured, too purposeful. He called out, his voice cracking. "Hello? Anyone there?" No reply. Just the wind and the occasional crack of ice settling on branches. He shook his head, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. But the dragging noise grew louder, closer, and something about it made his stomach knot. Jake decided to retreat toward his truck, moving cautiously, staying low and quiet. Snow crunched beneath him, but he tried to make his movements careful, almost like stalking the sound instead of fleeing from it. The forest seemed endless, and the darkness thickened with each step. Suddenly a shape flitted across his peripheral vision, a tall, thin shadow slipping between the trees. Jake froze, rifle raised, heart hammering. He swung his flashlight toward it. Nothing, just darkness and snow. A whisper echoed through the trees, faint, incomprehensible, like syllables he almost recognized. He jerked his head, spinning in place. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding him. Panic began to take hold. He ran, branches slapping his face, snow making the ground treacherous. Every step was frantic, desperate, and yet the dragging sound never seemed to get closer. It stayed just behind him, circling, patient. Jake tripped over a root and fell face first into the snow, losing his flashlight. He scrambled, hands numbed, trying to find it. When he finally managed to lift it, the beam cut through the trees and he froze. A figure stood not 10 feet away, impossibly tall, limbs long and angular, hunched slightly. Its face was obscured by shadow, and yet he felt eyes on him, staring through the darkness. "Who's there?" he shouted, voice hoarse. No answer, just that dragging, shuffling sound continuing around him. The figure didn't move closer, didn't retreat. It just watched, silent. Jake's hands shook as he raised the rifle, but the creature didn't flinch. He fired once. The sound cracked through the trees, but the figure remained. Fear overtook reason. He bolted again, running blindly through the forest, branches clawing at his jacket, snow slipping underfoot. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, it was impossible to tell. The dragging was always behind him, circling, patient, relentless. He stumbled over a rise and found himself in a small clearing, the snow deep and unbroken. Relief surged. Then he realized the tracks weren't just his own. Something else had moved here too. Large, uneven prints, like claws and feet combined, forming a strange pattern in the snow. Jake's breath came in harsh gasps as he scanned the clearing. Then he saw movement at the edge of the trees. Shapes huddled near a cluster of pines, their outlines distorted, grotesque, barely recognizable as human. The closer he looked, the more unnatural they seemed. Limbs too long, torsos bent in ways that defied anatomy, heads tilting unnaturally. They didn't move toward him, didn't speak, but the sense of attention was total, suffocating. He stumbled backward, panicked, slipping in the snow. The dragging sound surged closer, faster now, accompanied by a low hiss, like something breathing through a clenched throat. Jake spun, searching for a path, any path, and spotted the faint line of a trail leading away. He ran, following it blindly, until he tripped over a fallen log and landed hard. Pain shot through his leg, and he realized with horror that he had twisted his ankle. He forced himself up, hobbling down the trail, dragging the leg behind him, the dragging noise now merging with distant, soft whispers calling his name. The snowstorm thickened, obscuring visibility. The shadows of the trees seemed alive, stretching and twisting toward him. Every instinct screamed to run faster, but his body betrayed him. Hours, or maybe it was minutes, passed in a blur of exhaustion and fear. Finally, he broke through a dense thicket into a small clearing and saw lights in the distance. His pulse leapt. Civilization. A cabin? A truck? Anything. He staggered toward it, only to find a small campsite, embers glowing in the fire pit, but no one there. Figures stood around the fire, motionless. He raised his flashlight, illuminating them fully for the first time. Horrified, he realized they weren't human, or at least not entirely. Their features were wrong, eyes too large, limbs elongated, faces stretched and hollowed, movements jerky and unnatural. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him, but the sense of being watched, studied, pierced him like ice. Jake stumbled backward, heart hammering. The dragging sound rose again, now accompanied by a new sound, a deep, guttural growl. The tall figure emerged from the trees behind him, limbs bending impossibly as it moved. Panic overtook him. He ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, snow covering his face, tearing at his gloves and jacket. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. He lost track of everything except the relentless pursuit. Eventually he found a frozen creek, thin ice cracking beneath his weight. He crawled along the bank, trying not to fall through, listening as the dragging noise circled him. Shadow shapes moved beneath the ice, flickering in the dim light like distorted reflections. Finally, exhausted and numb, he found the road, the faint line of asphalt cutting through the forest. He collapsed, shivering, and saw his truck in the distance, headlights off, half buried in snow. Relief surged as he ran toward it, yanking open the door and locking it behind him. He sat, panting, rifle across his lap, staring at the trees, aware that the sense of being watched had not left. Driving away, he kept the headlights off, shadows from the roadside trees dancing across the windshield. He glanced in the rearview mirror and thought he saw movement, fleeting glimpses of dark shapes slipping between the trees. He told himself it was imagination, exhaustion, paranoia, but he could still hear it, that dragging sound, patient, waiting, circling just beyond the edge of vision. When he finally reached the town, he stopped at a gas station, bought a coffee, and tried to convince himself it was over. He told the clerk he had a rough night in the woods, but the polite smile he received felt hollow, distant. That night in his motel room, he lay awake, rifle across his chest, listening. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but beneath it he heard the soft, dragging shuffle, closer now, like it had followed him. And then the whisper, faint but unmistakable, Jake. He hasn't hunted alone at night since. Story the end. The sky was bruised purple when I pulled off the snow-packed highway onto the logging road that led into the mountains. Winter hunting season in Montana was always brutal, but this year I had the woods to myself. My buddy usually came along, but he had to work, so I was solo. I told myself I liked hunting alone. It was peaceful, gave me a chance to think, but deep down I knew the woods at night were different when you were alone. Quieter, deader. I shrugged and shook my head, telling myself I was being paranoid as I checked my rifle in the passenger seat and strapped on my pack. The temperature read 15 degrees below zero on the truck's gauge. Frost clung to the windshield like thick sugar, and the snow outside was already ankle-deep on the road. I grabbed my thermos of coffee, took a long swig, and started down the logging road, boots crunching against frozen gravel, my breath pluming in the frigid air. The plan was simple. Hike a few miles up, find a ridge I'd spotted the week before, and settle in for the evening. The deer were known to bed in the lower valleys, and the ridge would give me a clear shot when they moved down at dusk. I'd been hunting this area for years. I knew the trails, the sign of fresh tracks, the old scrapes and rubs on the trees. But the forest felt different tonight, like someone had rearranged the trees while I wasn't looking. Snow-laden branches hung lower, obscuring the narrow path. Shadows moved unnaturally, stretching across the snow like living fingers. I tried to shake it off as I hiked, telling myself the storm made everything look odd. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened completely, the sun swallowed by clouds heavy with snow. I found the ridge, set my pack down, and scanned the valley below with my binoculars. Tracks of a buck led into a thicket near a creek, deep and fresh. Perfect. I adjusted my rifle and moved quietly toward the tracks, careful to keep my footing. The crunch of snow under my boots sounded impossibly loud. Every tree seemed to watch me, every shadow a potential threat. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. But when the wind stopped altogether, the forest went unnervingly silent. No rustling, no birds, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the snow settling on branches. The tracks led to a small clearing near the creek. They stopped abruptly. I scanned the area with my headlamp, the beam slicing through the darkness. The snow was pristine, untouched, except for the tracks I'd been following. I squinted, trying to find the deer. That's when I noticed the footprints that weren't mine, or the deer's. Deep, wide, human-like, but staggered and uneven, as if whoever made them had a strange gait. I froze, rifle raised, heart thumping in my chest. They led straight into the trees, then vanished. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I tried to convince myself it was another hunter. Maybe someone out late, maybe scouting. But the tracks were too large, too erratic, like the person or thing wasn't walking normally. I swallowed hard and decided to keep moving, just in case. The forest was starting to feel oppressive, like the trees were closing in. I shook my head, trying to focus on the task at hand. Deer. Hunt. Not whatever this was. As I moved back toward the ridge to get a better vantage point, I heard it. A low exhale, barely audible over the snow. My head snapped toward the sound. Nothing. I froze, listening. The wind was dead still. The sound came again, closer, deeper, like someone standing right behind me. I swung the rifle around, scanning. Still nothing. My pulse was hammering, my teeth chattering, not from cold, but from the creeping dread that had started to claw at me. I took a cautious step forward, and then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a tree, dark, tall, standing just off the trail. But its shape shifted, straightened unnaturally, taller than a man, shoulders broad, head tilted slightly forward. The way it moved was off. Not walking, not running, just appearing closer each time I blinked. My stomach dropped. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs felt like they'd frozen solid. I whispered, "Hey, you there?" My voice cracked. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood, watching, silent. My mind raced. Could be a lost hunter. Could be, God help me, something else. I forced myself to move, inching backward, trying to put distance between us. Each step made a crunch louder than the last. My headlamp flickered as the temperature seemed to plummet further. Suddenly, it shifted. The head tilted unnaturally to one side and it stepped forward. No snow crunched under its feet. None, just it, solid and impossible, moving closer through the forest like the snow didn't exist. Panic finally broke my restraint. I turned and ran, boots skidding, rifle bouncing against my shoulder, branches slapping my face. Snow clung to my hair and eyelashes, my lungs burned with cold air. Behind me, I heard it move too. Not crunching snow, not running. Just something following. I stumbled, catching myself on a tree trunk, and looked back. The figure was there, now much closer, impossibly tall, unnervingly still. Its head twisted slightly, impossibly, like the neck wasn't constrained by human bone. I turned and ran again, faster this time, throwing caution to the wind. My legs ached, my heart raced. I had no plan, no trail in mind, just one thought: get to the truck. Branches scratched my face, snow blinded me, and the darkness swallowed me. I tripped over a root, falling hard, snow packing into my jacket and gloves. I scrambled up, coughing, vision blurred from cold and fear. The breathing, if it could be called that, echoed somewhere behind me, unnervingly close. It wasn't a human rhythm. Too deep, too deliberate. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing I recognized, the old logging trail, flat and wide. The truck's headlights were just visible, casting long shadows into the forest. Relief washed over me like heat. I sprinted, chest burning, arms flailing, desperate. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not when my survival depended on reaching that truck. I threw open the door, slammed it, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking violently as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, sending clouds of exhaust into the cold air. I hit the headlights. And there it was, standing at the edge of the trail. No footprints. Just standing. The tall, dark shape, head tilted, shoulders rigid, unmoving. It didn't react to the lights. Didn't move. Just watched. I floored the gas, tires spinning in the snow, throwing powdery spray into the trees. The figure didn't chase, didn't move. It just stood there, silent, unnatural, impossibly still. I didn't slow down until I hit the highway, the snow thinning behind me, the forest fading into darkness and distance. Even then, I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it reappear, following me down the road. I didn't return to those woods for months. When I finally went back with a buddy, everything was normal. Tracks were where they should be, trees where they should stand. No sign of that figure, no tracks of anything out of place. I told myself I'd imagined it. My mind playing tricks in isolation, in cold, in fear. But I know what I saw. I know how it moved. I know how impossible it was. And sometimes on cold, quiet nights, I swear I can still feel it standing at the edge of the trees, just watching, waiting for the darkness to thicken enough to move again. Story. The end.